I'm standing in my grandfather's hospital room watching the color drain from his face as he whispers, "What do you mean, what email?" Behind me, my Aunt Catherine shifts uncomfortably, and I notice her hand tightening around her designer purse, the one that costs more than I make in 3 months waiting tables. That's when I knew. Someone had stolen my future, and they were standing right here in this room pretending to care whether Grandpa made it through the night. My name is Alexandra Alex Morrison, and I'm 28 years old. 3 days ago, I thought I was just another struggling graduate student working double shifts to afford rent in a shoebox apartment while finishing my master's degree in environmental science. Today, I discovered that for the last 5 years I was supposed to be a half-millionaire. And the people who stole that from me are my own family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning of the worst, and ultimately best week of my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was in the middle of my shift at Riverside Diner, balancing 3 plates of lunch specials and trying to remember which table ordered extra ranch, when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I ignored it. We weren't allowed to check phones during shifts, and I needed this job too much to risk Gloria, my manager, catching me slacking off. The diner was one of those classic American establishments that had been serving the same menu since 1987, with vinyl booths that were cracked and retaped so many times they looked like abstract art. The coffee was terrible, the tips were modest, and the work was exhausting, but it was 3 blocks from my apartment and they let me pick up extra shifts whenever I needed money, which was always. After the lunch rush died down around 2:30 p.m., I finally checked my phone. 7 missed calls from my mother. My stomach dropped immediately. Mom and I weren't close. We talked maybe once a month, brief conversations filled with awkward silences, and her thinly veiled disappointment that I'd chosen impractical environmental science over something sensible like business or nursing. 7 calls in 2 hours meant something was catastrophically wrong. I stepped into the kitchen area where Gloria couldn't see me and called back. "Alexandra," finally. My mother's voice was tight, stressed, the way it got when she was trying to control a situation that was spiraling. "It's your grandfather. He's had a stroke. We're at St. Catherine's Hospital. You need to come now." My grandfather, Thomas Morrison, the one person in my entire family who'd ever made me feel like I mattered, like my dreams of studying climate change and protecting ecosystems weren't foolish wastes of time. The man who used to take me on nature walks when I was little, teaching me the names of birds and trees, who listened to my ideas about conservation with genuine interest instead of the patronizing smiles I got from everyone else. "How bad is it?" I managed to ask. "They're saying the next 48 hours are critical. Alex, he's asking for you. Specifically for you." She paused. "Can you get here?" I told Gloria there was a family emergency and left my apron on the hook, knowing I'd probably lose today's tips but not caring. I caught 2 buses across town to St. Catherine's, a private hospital in the wealthy district where my extended family lived, a world away from my neighborhood of laundromats and discount grocery stores. The Morrison family had money. Not extravagant wealth, but comfortable upper-middle-class prosperity. My grandfather had built a successful accounting firm from nothing, and when he'd sold it 15 years ago, he'd walked away with enough to ensure a very comfortable retirement. My Aunt Catherine, his only daughter and my mother's older sister, had married well, a corporate attorney named David Brennan, and lived in a house with a 3-car garage and a pool. My mother had married less well. My father, James Morrison, no relation to Grandpa despite sharing the last name, had been a charming dreamer who cycled through business ventures that always seemed one break away from making it big. They divorced when I was 12, and Dad had moved to Arizona chasing some opportunity that, like all the others, never materialized. Mom had spent the years since working as an office manager, and resenting that her sister got the easy life while she struggled. And me? I was the disappointment, the daughter who'd turned down a business scholarship to a state university to study environmental science at a smaller school where I could focus on research. The girl who cared more about saving wetlands than making money. The family member who showed up to Christmas dinner in thrift store clothes while everyone else wore designer labels. I'd learned to make myself small around them, to nod and smile when Uncle David made jokes about tree huggers and climate alarmists. To stay quiet when Aunt Catherine talked about her Caribbean vacations and investment portfolios. To accept that in the Morrison family hierarchy, I ranked somewhere below the family dog. But Grandpa had always been different. He'd slip me money for textbooks. He'd ask about my research with genuine curiosity. He'd tell me stories about growing up poor during the Depression, about building his business from nothing, about how the best things in life were the ones you created with your own hands and mind, not the ones you bought. "You've got something special, Alex," he told me last Christmas when we'd managed to grab 5 minutes alone. "You care about things bigger than yourself. Don't let anyone convince you that's foolish. The world needs people like you." I'd held onto those words during every difficult shift, every month when rent was tight, every moment when I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake choosing passion over profit. Now he was in a hospital bed, possibly dying, and he was asking for me. I found the family in a private waiting room on the 4th floor. Aunt Catherine was there with Uncle David, both dressed like they'd come from the country club. My mother sat separate from them, tension visible in every line of her body. And there was my cousin Melissa, Catherine's daughter, scrolling through her phone with perfectly manicured nails, looking bored. Melissa was 2 years younger than me but lived a life that felt decades removed from mine. She'd gotten her MBA from a prestigious university, paid for by her parents, immediately landed a job at her father's law firm, nepotism at its finest, and married a junior partner, keeping it all in the family. She drove a Mercedes, lived in a condo downtown, and posted Instagram photos of her blessed life that made my teeth hurt. "Alexandra." Aunt Catherine stood, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. "So good of you to come. I know you're so busy with your studies and your work." The pause before studies said everything. To Catherine, my master's degree was a hobby, not a real accomplishment. "How is he?" I asked, ignoring the dig. "Stable for now," Uncle David said. "The doctors are monitoring him closely. The next 2 days will tell us more." "Can I see him?" My mother and aunt exchanged a look. Some silent communication I couldn't read. "He's been asking for you," Mom said quietly. "Specifically, he's worried about something. Keeps mentioning an email he sent you." "An email?" I pulled out my phone, opening my email app. "When?" "5 years ago." This from Melissa, her voice carrying an edge I couldn't identify. "He keeps saying he sent you an important email 5 years ago and asking if you got it. We think the stroke might be affecting his memory. Making him confused about time. 5 years ago, I'd been 23, fresh out of undergraduate studies, applying to graduate programs. I scrolled back through my email, searching for anything from my grandfather around that time. Nothing. "I don't see anything," I said. "What was it about?" Another look between the adults. Definitely something they weren't saying. "Why don't you go see him?" Aunt Catherine said too brightly. "I'm sure seeing you will put his mind at ease." A nurse led me to Grandpa's room. He looked small in the hospital bed, diminished in a way that made my chest tight. His white hair was messy, his normally sharp blue eyes unfocused. But when he saw me, something cleared in his expression. "Alex, my girl." His voice was weak, slurred slightly from the stroke. Did you get my email?" I pulled a chair close to his bed and took his hand carefully, mindful of the 4-line. "Grandpa, what email? When did you send it?" 5 years ago. July." He was struggling to form words, frustration evident on his face. "The trust fund. I set it up for you. Sent you all the information. Did you get it?" My heart started pounding. "Trust fund? Grandpa, I don't know what you're talking about. I never got an email about a trust fund." The color drained from his face. His hand tightened on mine with surprising strength. "Never got it? But I sent it to your college email. The information about the account, the access codes, everything. $500,000, Alex. For you. To help you build your life." The room seemed to tilt. $500,000? That was impossible. That was life-changing money. That was debt-free money. That was never worry about rent again money. "Grandpa, I promise you I never received that email. Are you sure you sent it?" "I sent it." His eyes were fierce now, focused despite the stroke's effects. July 15th, 5 years ago. I set up the trust fund on your 23rd birthday. Sent you all the details. It was supposed to be available to you immediately. For school, for living expenses, for whatever you needed to pursue your dreams without financial stress. While I was eating ramen for dinner and working 2 jobs and lying awake at night worried about student loans, there was supposedly $500,000 waiting for me. Why didn't you tell me about it in person? I asked. Why just email? You were traveling that summer. Remember? That research internship in Costa Rica studying rainforest conservation. I didn't want to distract you with money talk. Wanted you to focus on your work. The email had everything you needed, bank information, how to access the funds, my lawyer's contact information to help you set everything up properly. I did remember that internship. It had been the highlight of my early 20s, 2 months living in a research station, working with scientists studying biodiversity. I'd checked emails sporadically, usually once a week when we went into town for supplies. Grandpa, I swear to you I never got that email. I would remember something like that. His expression shifted from confusion to something darker. Something that looked like understanding and anger combined. If you didn't get it, then someone else did. What do you mean? Your college email. Who else had access to it? I thought back. My college email account, the one I'd had through undergraduate studies, I'd shared the password with. Oh no. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mom helped me set up my college accounts, I said slowly. She had all my passwords in case of emergencies. And Aunt Catherine helped too because she was better with technology. Grandpa's face went pale, then flushed with anger despite his weakened state. Catherine? Of course. Grandpa, what are you saying? I'm saying someone intercepted that email, Alex. Someone made sure you never saw it. And I have a terrible suspicion about who. Before I could respond, the door opened. Aunt Catherine swept in with her practiced smile, Melissa trailing behind her. Dad, you shouldn't be getting worked up. The doctor said you need rest. She looked at me with eyes that were suddenly calculating. Alex, honey, maybe you should let him sleep. We were just talking about an email, I said, watching her face carefully. About a trust fund. For just a fraction of a second, something flickered in Catherine's expression. Fear? Guilt? Then it was gone, replaced by confused concern. A trust fund? Dad, what are you talking about? Don't play games, Catherine. Grandpa's voice was stronger now, powered by anger. I set up a $500,000 trust fund for Alex 5 years ago. Sent her all the information via email. She never received it. You want to explain how that happened? Melissa's face went very carefully blank. Catherine's smile stayed fixed but her eyes went cold. Dad, you're confused. The stroke has affected your memory. You're combining things that happened at different times. My memory is fine. He tried to sit up, and I gently pressed his shoulder to keep him from pulling his fore. I established that trust fund specifically for Alex. I wanted her to have financial security to pursue her environmental work without the burden of debt. I sent her everything she needed to access it. Someone made sure she never got that email. Dad, this is ridiculous. If there was a trust fund, Alex would know about it. She'd have records, bank statements, something. You're obviously confused and... Get out. Grandpa's voice was cold and clear. Get out of my room. You and your daughter. Get out now. Catherine's mask slipped completely. You can't possibly believe that I would. Out. A nurse rushed in, alarmed by the shouting and the spike in Grandpa's vitals showing on the monitors. I'm going to have to ask everyone to leave. He needs to rest, and this stress is dangerous for him right now. As we filed out, I caught Melissa whispering to her mother. Mom, we need to talk. Now. In the waiting room, my mother looked between me and Catherine with wide, confused eyes. What just happened in there? Your father is having delusions from the stroke, Catherine said smoothly. It's very common. The doctors warned us he might say strange things. He seemed pretty clear about a $500,000 trust fund he set up for Alex, I said, keeping my voice level. And about sending me an email with all the information. An email I never received. My mother's face went through several expressions, confusion, realization, shock, and finally, something that might have been guilt. Catherine. Did Dad really set up a trust fund for Alex? Mom, we should go, Melissa said quickly. Let the doctors handle Grandpa. Alex can stay if she wants to keep upsetting him with wild accusations. I'm not accusing anyone, I interrupted. I'm asking a simple question. Grandpa says he set up a trust fund and sent me information about it. If that's true, there should be records, bank documents, legal paperwork. That's all easy to verify. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Uncle David cleared his throat. This is clearly a family matter that needs to be discussed privately, not in a hospital waiting room. Catherine, perhaps we should all go home, let emotions settle, and address this tomorrow when everyone is calmer. Perfect idea, Catherine said quickly. Too quickly. Alex, honey, I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. Your grandfather is confused, and we're all upset. Let's reconvene tomorrow when we've all had time to think. But I wasn't letting this go. Not now. Not after years of struggling while apparently sitting on a fortune I never knew existed. I want to see the lawyer, I said. Grandpa mentioned he had a lawyer help set up the trust. I want to talk to them. That's not appropriate, Catherine started. Why not? I looked at each of them in turn. If Grandpa is confused and there's no trust fund, the lawyer will confirm that, and we can all relax. But if there is a trust fund, I let the implication hang. My mother spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. Catherine, if Dad set up a trust fund for Alex, she has a right to know about it. Stay out of this, Linda, Catherine snapped. This doesn't concern you. Alex is my daughter. If someone's been keeping money from her, money that her grandfather intended for her, then it absolutely concerns me. The mask was fully off now. Catherine's face twisted with anger and something else. Fear. You know what your problem is, Linda? You've always been jealous. Jealous that I married well while you picked that loser James. Jealous that Melissa is successful while your daughter is wasting her life studying trees and working in a diner. And now you want to stir up drama about some imaginary trust fund because you can't stand that even Dad's affection has its limits. Don't talk about my daughter that way. My mother stood up, and I saw a flash of the woman she might have been if life hadn't beaten her down. And don't think I haven't noticed how convenient it is that you're the one who helped Alex set up her college email. How you were always helping with her technology because you're so good with computers. The pieces were falling into place now. The way Aunt Catherine had always inserted herself into my life at key moments. The way she'd offered to help with college applications, email setup, even my FAFSA forms. I thought she was being kind. Now I wondered if she'd been positioning herself to control information. This is absurd, Catherine hissed. You're all being manipulated by an old man's stroke-induced fantasies. There is no trust fund. There never was. And I will not stand here and be accused of. Then you won't mind if I contact Grandpa's lawyer myself, I said quietly. What was the firm's name? Wellington and Associates? I'm sure they'll be happy to clarify the situation. The fear that flashed across Catherine's face told me everything I needed to know. There was a trust fund. She had intercepted the email. And for 5 years, while I'd struggled and scraped and sacrificed, she'd kept me in poverty while I sat on a fortune. My aunt, my own blood, had stolen my future. And now that I knew, everything was about to change. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My mind kept replaying that moment in the hospital room when understanding had crashed over me like a wave. $500,000. 5 years. All those nights I'd chosen sleep over dinner because I could only afford one. All those times I'd walked an extra mile to save bus fare. All those scholarship applications and grant proposals and desperate calculations about whether I could afford both textbooks and groceries. And the entire time there had been money. My money. Sitting somewhere waiting for me. While my aunt smiled at family gatherings and asked with false concern how I was managing on my limited resources. I sat at my laptop in my tiny studio apartment, 400 square feet that cost me $950 a month, cheap only by comparison to everything else in the city, and started searching. Thomas Morrison. Trust Fund. Wellington and Associates. The law firm was real. Established in 1987, specializing in estate planning and trust management. Their website listed 3 partners, And there at the bottom was the name that made my heart race. Margaret Wellington herself, senior partner, with over 30 years of experience in fiduciary law. I drafted an email at 2 o'clock in the morning, deleting and rewriting it 7 times before settling on something that sounded professional rather than desperate or accusatory. Dear Ms. Wellington, my name is Alexandra Morrison, granddaughter of Thomas Morrison. My grandfather recently informed me that he established a trust fund in my name approximately 5 years ago, and that your firm handled the legal arrangements. I never received notification of this trust fund, and would like to verify its existence and understand the terms of access. I would greatly appreciate the opportunity to meet with you at your earliest convenience to discuss this matter. I can be reached at this email address or by phone at the number below. Thank you for your time and attention to this urgent matter. Sincerely, Alexandra Morrison. I hit send before I could second-guess myself again, then sat staring at the screen as if Margaret Wellington might respond instantly at 2 o'clock in the morning. Of course she didn't. But sleep was impossible now. I opened a new document and started writing down everything I could remember. Dates, conversations, moments when Aunt Catherine had been unusually involved in my life. The time she'd insisted on being present when I set up my college email account, saying she wanted to make sure I did it correctly. The way she'd offered to help me organize my digital files and folders freshman year. Spending an afternoon on my laptop while I'd been grateful for her attention. Had she gone through my email then? Deleted the message from Grandpa? Or had she somehow set up filters or forwarding rules so his email never reached me in the first place? I thought about all the times over the past 5 years when I'd seen my aunt and uncle, Christmas dinners, Thanksgiving, Grandpa's birthday parties, Catherine smiling at me with what I'd interpreted as pity for my financial struggles, making comments about how hard it must be to live on a graduate student stipend, occasionally slipping me a $20 bill like she was being generous. $20. When she was sitting on knowledge of $500,000 that belonged to me. The anger was a living thing now, hot and clarifying. But underneath it was something else. A memory surfacing. Something Grandpa had said last Christmas when Catherine wasn't around. We'd been in his study, and he'd asked about my research, my plans after graduation. I told him I was worried about student loan debt, about whether I'd be able to afford to take a position with an environmental nonprofit or if I'd have to find corporate work that paid better but mattered less to me. Don't worry so much about money, Alex, he'd said. I've made sure you'll have what you need to follow your dreams. You'll understand soon enough. At the time, I thought he meant he might leave me something in his will eventually. It had never occurred to me that he meant something already in place, already available, already mine. Because the email had never arrived. And I'd never known to ask. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, I finally fell into restless sleep on my couch, my laptop still open beside me. I woke to my phone ringing at 8:30 a.m. Unknown number, but I answered immediately, my heart pounding. Ms. Morrison? This is Margaret Wellington from Wellington and Associates. I received your email this morning, and I believe we need to speak urgently. Are you available to come to my office today? The fact that a senior partner at a law firm was calling me personally, hours after my email, told me everything I needed to know. This was real. The trust fund was real. And something was very, very wrong. I can be there whenever you need me, I said, already pulling on yesterday's jeans. Come at 10 o'clock. Come alone, please. And Ms. Morrison? Bring identification and any documentation you have regarding your relationship to Thomas Morrison. I arrived at Wellington and Associates at 9:45, wearing the only professional outfit I owned. A blazer and slacks I'd bought from a thrift store for job interviews. The office was in a high-rise downtown, all glass and steel and the kind of quiet money that doesn't need to announce itself. Margaret Wellington was a woman in her mid-60s with steel gray hair, sharp eyes behind designer glasses, and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades navigating complicated legal waters. She stood when I entered her office, shaking my hand with a grip that was firm and assessing. Ms. Morrison, thank you for coming so quickly. She gestured to a chair across from her massive desk. I have to tell you, your email this morning confirmed some suspicions I've had for quite some time. My throat was dry. About the trust fund? About why you never accessed it. She pulled out a thick folder from her desk drawer. Your grandfather established a trust fund for you on July 10th 5 years ago. The amount was $500,000, invested conservatively with an average annual return of approximately 4%. With compound interest over 5 years, the current value is approximately $608,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. Not just $500,000, over $600,000 now. Enough to change everything about my life. Enough to eliminate my student loans, buy a reliable car, afford an apartment with a real bedroom, pursue any career I wanted without financial desperation driving every decision. I don't understand, I managed. If the trust exists, where has it been? Why didn't I know about it? Margaret's expression hardened. Because the trust was established with specific instructions. Your grandfather wanted you to have complete control and access upon the trust's creation. However, he also designated your Aunt Catherine as a secondary contact, someone who would be notified of the trust's existence in case you were unreachable, or in an emergency situation where someone needed to access funds on your behalf. The pieces were clicking together now, forming a picture that made me sick. My aunt knew about the trust, I said slowly. Your aunt was sent notification simultaneously with you. She received detailed information about the trust's existence, value, and the fact that you were the primary beneficiary with full control and access. Margaret paused, her jaw tight. Miss Morrison, I'm going to be frank with you. About 2 years ago I became concerned. It's unusual for a beneficiary to never access a trust fund, especially one as substantial as yours. I attempted to reach you multiple times at the email address your grandfather had provided. My college email. Yes. Every message I sent bounced back as undeliverable. The account had been closed or deleted. I tried to locate you through other means, but Alexandra Morrison is a relatively common name, and without more specific information I had limited success. I did contact your grandfather about 6 months ago to express my concerns, but he assured me that you were traveling for your research and that you'd been in contact with him about the trust. He said that. Yes. Which confused me, because you'd never once contacted our office or made any attempt to access the funds. But your grandfather seemed confident, so I assumed there was family communication happening that I wasn't privy to. Her expression turned grim. Now I suspect that someone was intercepting our communications and feeding your grandfather false information to prevent him from investigating further. The anger was back, sharper now. My aunt. I can't make accusations without proof, but Miss Morrison, I've been practicing fiduciary law for 32 years. I know what financial abuse looks like within families, and this has all the hallmarks. She slid a document across the desk. This is the original trust agreement, signed by your grandfather and filed with the court. You are listed as the sole beneficiary with immediate and complete access to all funds. There are no restrictions, no conditions, no requirements. It's yours. It's been yours for 5 years. I stared at my grandfather's signature on the document, his familiar handwriting on the margins where he'd added notes. For my granddaughter Alex, who will change the world if we give her the chance. Tears blurred my vision. All this time he'd been trying to give me that chance. And someone had stolen it. What do I need to do to access the trust now? I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. Margaret pulled out another set of forms. Sign these documents confirming your identity and your acceptance of the trust. I'll need to see 2 forms of government ID. Once we process the paperwork, which should take approximately 3 business days, you'll have complete access to the account. I can also arrange for a meeting with our financial advisor if you'd like guidance on managing the funds. I signed everything with shaking hands, showed her my driver's license and passport, and answered security questions that confirmed my identity beyond any doubt. Ms. Morrison, Margaret said as I prepared to leave, I need to ask you something, and please think carefully before you answer. Do you want to pursue legal action against whoever prevented you from accessing this trust? Did I want justice? Did I want accountability? Did I want my aunt to face consequences for what she'd done? Yes, I said without hesitation. I want to know exactly what happened, how it happened, and I want everyone involved to be held responsible. Margaret nodded with satisfaction. Good, because I've already started documenting irregularities in this case. With your permission, I'd like to conduct a full investigation into how and why you were prevented from accessing funds that were legally yours. This may involve subpoenaing email records, examining digital communications, and potentially filing complaints with the state bar if we find evidence of misconduct by any attorneys involved. You think another lawyer was involved? Your aunt had to know enough about trust law to understand what she was doing and how to hide it. That suggests she either educated herself extensively or had professional help. Either way, we'll find out. She handed me her business card. Call me anytime, day or night. And Ms. Morrison, be very careful about who you tell about this. If your aunt realizes you're investigating, she may try to destroy evidence or create alternative narratives. I left Wellington and Associates feeling like I was walking through a dream. $600,000. Mine. Available in 3 days. The number was so large it didn't feel real yet, just abstract zeros that hadn't translated into anything tangible. I was halfway home when my mother called. Alex, where are you? Catherine wants to have a family meeting this afternoon to discuss what happened yesterday at the hospital. She says we all need to clear the air. I'm sure she does, I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Sweetheart, I know you're upset, but maybe your grandfather really was confused. Catherine showed me some documents that suggest there might not be a trust fund after all. She says Dad sometimes talked about setting up trusts but never actually followed through. Ice flooded my veins. Mom, did you see those documents yourself? Or did Catherine just tell you about them? Silence. Then quietly, she showed me something on her phone. Some legal paperwork that looked official. Mom, I just came from Grandpa's lawyer. Margaret Wellington. The trust fund is real. It's been real for 5 years. And the current value is over $600,000. I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. What? The trust exists. I'm the sole beneficiary. And I've spent the last 5 years struggling and working myself to exhaustion while Aunt Catherine knew the entire time that I was sitting on over $500,000. No, Catherine wouldn't. She couldn't. She did. And I'm going to prove it. I took a breath. Mom, I need you to tell me everything you remember about the day we set up my college email account. Everything Catherine did, everything she said, any time she spent alone with my computer or my phone. Over the next 20 minutes, my mother walked me through that day 5 years ago. How Catherine had insisted on being present, because she was so much better with technology. How she'd taken my laptop into another room at one point to configure some settings, while Mom and I had been making lunch. How she'd set up my email recovery options and security questions, saying she wanted to make sure my account was protected. Protected. What she'd really been doing was ensuring she had access. Ensuring she could intercept, delete, or redirect any important communications. Ensuring I remained ignorant of the fortune that was supposed to free me from financial struggle. I didn't know, my mother whispered. I swear, Alex, I didn't know. I thought she was helping. I know, Mom. And I did. My mother had her flaws, but this kind of calculated theft wasn't in her nature. She was a victim of Catherine's manipulation too, just in different ways. What are you going to do? I'm going to that family meeting this afternoon. And I'm going to watch Catherine try to lie her way out of this. But I'm not going to tell her that I've already been to Wellington and Associates. I'm not going to let her know that I have proof. Why not? Because I want to see what other lies she tells. I want to document everything. And Mom, I want you to do something for me. When we're all together today, I need you to record the conversation on your phone. Can you do that? Another pause. Then with a strength I hadn't heard in her voice in years. Yes, I can do that. The family meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. at Catherine and David's house, the mini mansion in the suburb with the good schools and the neighborhood association that regulated lawn height. I arrived deliberately on time, not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to seem scared. Melissa answered the door, and her smile was as fake as the designer bag hanging in the entryway. Alex, so glad you could make it. Mom's in the living room. The living room was a showpiece of expensive but soulless interior design. Everything matched. Everything coordinated. Nothing looked like actual people lived there. Catherine sat in an armchair like a queen on a throne, David beside her in a suit despite it being Saturday afternoon. My mother sat separate from them, her phone visible on her lap, and I knew she was already recording. Alexandra, Catherine's voice was warm honey laced with poison. Thank you for coming. I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday, and I want to clear up any misunderstandings. I sat across from her, forcing my body language to stay open and uncertain, like I was still the struggling graduate student who could be intimidated by her successful relatives. I'm listening. Your grandfather is very ill, and the stroke has affected his cognitive function more than we initially realized. The doctors confirmed this morning that he's experiencing some memory confusion and confabulation, which means he's mixing up real memories with imagined ones. She pulled out a tablet and showed me something that looked like a medical chart. See? Right here. The neurologist noted that he's been making statements that don't align with reality. What does that have to do with the trust fund he mentioned? Catherine sighed with practiced patience, like she was explaining something to a child. Sweetheart, there is no trust fund. Your grandfather talked about setting one up for you years ago. He even consulted with lawyers about it. But he ultimately decided not to move forward with it because he felt you needed to learn to make your own way in the world first, without the crutch of family money. The lie was so smooth, so practiced that I almost believe she believed it herself. If there's no trust fund, then there should be no record of one at Wellington and Associates, I said carefully. Something flickered in Catherine's eyes. Exactly. Which is why there isn't one. So if I called Margaret Wellington right now and asked her directly, she would tell me no trust fund was ever established? She would tell you that your grandfather consulted with them but never finalized anything. Catherine leaned forward, her expression all false sympathy. Alex, I understand why you want this to be real. You're struggling financially, you're under enormous stress, and the idea of a magical trust fund solving all your problems is appealing. But holding on to false hope will only hurt you more in the long run. I looked at my mother, who was pale but holding her phone steady, getting every word. I looked at David, whose attorney face was perfectly neutral but whose eyes betrayed calculation. I looked at Melissa, who wouldn't meet my gaze at all. And I made a decision. I would let them think they'd won. I would let Catherine believe her lies had worked, that I was too poor and too powerless to challenge her version of reality. Because in 3 days, when the trust fund money hit my account, when I had actual resources and actual power, then I would come for them with everything I had. Maybe you're right, I said quietly, letting defeat creep into my voice. Maybe Grandpa was just confused. Maybe I wanted it to be real so badly that I convinced myself it was. The relief on Catherine's face was visible. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd successfully gaslit me into doubting my own grandfather's words. I'm so glad you understand, sweetheart. This has been hard on all of us. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. Why don't you go visit your grandfather tomorrow? I'm sure seeing you will make him feel better, and you can tell him you understand he was just confused. It'll ease his mind. I stood, nodded, played the part of the defeated niece who'd been put back in her place. But as I walked out of that house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Real power. Not given to me, not inherited, but claimed through truth and preparation. In 3 days everything would change. And Catherine had no idea what was coming. The 72 hours between leaving Catherine's house and gaining access to the trust fund were the longest of my life. Every minute felt like an hour, every hour like a day. I moved through my shifts at the diner on autopilot, smiling at customers and refilling coffee cups while my mind raced through possibilities and plans. On Sunday morning, I visited Grandpa in the hospital. His condition had stabilized, though the doctors warned that his recovery would be long and uncertain. He was more alert than he'd been on that first day, his eyes sharper, his speech clearer. Alex, he said when I entered his room, did you talk to Margaret Wellington? I glanced at the door to make sure we were alone, then pulled my chair close to his bed. I did. Grandpa, the trust is real. Over $600,000 now with the interest. I'm getting access this week. The relief that flooded his face was profound. Thank God. I've been lying here thinking I'd imagined it all, that the stroke had scrambled my brain worse than I thought. His hand gripped mine with surprising strength. Your aunt, Catherine. She did this, didn't she? I think so. I'm going to prove it. What she did? Alex, that's not just unethical. That's theft. That's fraud. She kept you in poverty while you had access to money that I specifically wanted you to have. His voice was getting louder, agitated, and I could see his heart rate increasing on the monitors. "Grandpa, you need to stay calm," the doctors said. "I don't care what the doctors said. That's my daughter. My own child. And she stole from you. From you." Tears were forming in his eyes now, and it broke my heart to see this strong man reduced to tears by his own daughter's betrayal. I gave her everything. The best education, every opportunity. I helped her buy her first house, paid for Melissa's college. And this is how she repays me? By stealing from her own niece? "We're going to fix this," I said firmly. "Margaret Wellington is investigating. We're going to find out exactly what happened and make sure Catherine faces consequences. But right now, I need you to focus on getting better. I need you healthy and strong so you can testify about what you intended when you set up that trust." He took several deep breaths, visibly trying to calm himself. "You're right. You're absolutely right." He looked at me with such intensity that I had to fight back my own tears. "Alex, I want you to know something. I set up that trust because I believe in you. Not because I thought you needed rescuing, but because I wanted to remove the financial obstacles that might prevent you from doing the important work you're meant to do. The world needs people who care about the environment, who understand that protecting our planet is protecting our future. I didn't want money worries to force you into compromising your values." "I won't compromise," I promised. "Not anymore. Not ever again. That's my girl." He smiled, and for a moment he looked like the grandfather I'd always known, before the stroke, before the revelation of Catherine's betrayal. "What are you going to do with the money? Once you have access?" I've been thinking about that question constantly. First, I'm paying off my student loans. All of them. I'm done carrying that weight. Then I'm going to finish my master's degree without having to work 2 jobs. I'm going to focus entirely on my research for the first time in my life. And after that, I paused, the dream I'd never dared to voice out loud suddenly feeling possible. I want to start a conservation nonprofit. Something focused on protecting endangered wetlands and educating communities about ecosystem preservation. I've had the idea for years but never thought I'd have the resources to make it real. Grandpa's smile widened. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Not that you'd use the money to buy things or travel, though you should do some of that too. But that you'd use it as a foundation to build something meaningful. That's what money should be, Alex. A tool for creating the life you want and making the impact you're meant to make." We talked for another hour about my research, my ideas for the nonprofit, the specific wetland areas I wanted to focus on. It was the kind of conversation we'd always had, the kind that made me feel seen and valued and understood. When I finally left, I felt more centered than I had since this whole nightmare began. But outside the hospital, reality was waiting. As I walked to the bus stop, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop asking questions about things that don't concern you. You're making a mistake that will cost you everything." My blood ran cold. I screenshotted the message immediately and forwarded it to Margaret Wellington with a note about the threat. Her response came back within minutes. "Document everything. Don't respond to threats. This suggests someone is worried about what we might uncover." That's good. Worried people make mistakes. The threat should have scared me. Instead, it made me angry. Someone thought they could intimidate me into silence, into accepting injustice, into walking away from money that was legally mine. They thought I was still the powerless graduate student who could be pushed around and dismissed. They were about to learn otherwise. Monday dragged by with excruciating slowness. I worked my morning shift at the diner, served breakfast to regulars who had no idea that their struggling waitress was days away from financial freedom. During my break, I sat in the back office with Gloria, my manager, and made a decision I'd been contemplating since leaving Grandpa's hospital room. "Gloria, I need to give you my 2 weeks' notice." She looked up from the scheduling spreadsheet she'd been cursing at, surprise evident on her weathered face. "You got a better job? About damn time. You're way too smart to be slinging hash browns forever." Something like that. I couldn't tell her the whole truth, not yet, but I owed her something after 3 years of flexible scheduling and understanding when I needed time off for exams. My financial situation is changing. I'm going to be able to focus on finishing my degree full-time. Gloria studied me for a long moment, then smiled. "Good for you, kid. You've worked harder than anyone I've seen come through here. You deserve a break. She paused. You know what? Forget the 2 weeks. Work through this week if you need the money, but after that, you're free. Life's too short to spend extra time in a place like this if you don't have to. I felt tears prick my eyes at her unexpected kindness. Gloria, don't get mushy on me. Just promise me something. Whatever you end up doing with your life, make it matter. Make it count. Too many people settle for less than they're capable of. Don't be one of them. I promise. That evening, I met with my thesis advisor, Dr. Patricia Reeves, a woman in her 50s who'd spent 30 years studying wetland ecosystems and had become something of a mentor to me. I'd been working with her on my master's research for 2 years, and she knew better than anyone how much I'd been struggling to balance academic work with financial survival. We met at her office on campus, a cramped space overflowing with research papers, plant samples in various stages of preservation, and photographs of marshlands from around the world. She poured us both terrible coffee from the ancient pot she kept brewing in the corner and settled into her chair with the kind of comfort that came from spending most of her waking hours in this exact spot. Alex, you sounded urgent on the phone. What's going on? I told her an abbreviated version of the story. The trust fund, the missing email, my aunt's apparent theft, the impending access to money that would change everything. Dr. Reeves listened without interrupting, her expression growing more outraged as the story progressed. When I finished, she set down her coffee mug with enough force to slosh liquid onto her already stained desk. That's unconscionable. Your own aunt. For 5 years. She shook her head. Alex, I've watched you work yourself to exhaustion. I've seen you choose between buying research materials and buying groceries. I've written you letters of recommendation where I had to carefully word around the fact that your publication output was limited because you were working 40 hours a week just to survive. And the entire time there was money. Your money. I know. And I'm angry. But Dr. Reeves, I'm also excited. Because for the first time I can see a path forward that doesn't involve constant compromise. I can finish my thesis properly. I can pursue the research I've always wanted to do. I can maybe even start thinking about that conservation organization we've talked about. Her expression shifted from outrage to something more calculating. The wetland restoration nonprofit. You're serious about that? More serious than I've ever been about anything except my research. Dr. Reeves pulled out a folder from her filing cabinet, one I'd seen her add to occasionally over the past 2 years. Then you need to see this. I've been collecting these for you, in case you ever got the opportunity to pursue this dream. Inside the folder were articles, research papers, case studies of successful small conservation organizations, contact information for experts in nonprofit management and environmental law, even draft mission statements and program proposals. She'd been building a roadmap for a future I'd barely dared to imagine. You've been planning this? I asked, overwhelmed. I've been hoping for this. You have the passion, the knowledge, and the drive to make a real difference in wetland conservation. What you've been missing is the resources. Now, if what you're telling me is true, you're about to have those resources. She leaned forward intently. But Alex, listen to me carefully. Money is a tool, not a solution. You're going to need more than funding to make this work. You're going to need partnerships, political support, community buy-in, scientific credibility. You're going to need to be strategic and patient and willing to play long-term games. I know. But I'm ready. I've been preparing for this my entire academic career without even realizing it. Then let's use the next few months wisely. Finish your thesis. Graduate with distinction. Publish your findings in respected journals. Build your credibility in the field. And while you're doing that, we'll work together on the business plan for your organization. Make it so solid, so compelling that when you're ready to launch, you'll have the support of everyone who matters in conservation circles. We spent the next 3 hours going through her folder, discussing possibilities, mapping out timelines. By the time I left her office, I had a notebook full of ideas and a sense of purpose that felt more real than anything I'd experienced in years. Tuesday arrived with agonizing slowness. One more day until the trust fund money would be available. One more day of pretending everything was normal, while my entire world was poised to transform. I spent the morning in the university library, ostensibly working on my thesis, but actually researching everything I could find about financial fraud within families. The patterns were depressingly familiar. trusted relatives with access to accounts or information, vulnerable victims who didn't realize they were being stolen from, systems that made it difficult to prove intent or recover losses. But I also found stories of victims who'd fought back, who'd pursued justice despite the personal cost, who'd held their abusers accountable even when everyone told them to let it go, to move on, to preserve family peace. Those stories gave me strength. I wasn't the first person to face this. I wouldn't be the last. But I could be someone who refused to accept injustice quietly. My phone rang around 2 p.m. Margaret Wellington. Ms. Morrison, I have an update. We've subpoenaed email records from your college's server archive. It took some legal maneuvering, but we have them. And Alex, we found it. We found the original email your grandfather sent you 5 years ago. My heart started pounding. What did it say? Everything he told you. Details about the trust, account numbers, access instructions, his reasons for setting it up. It was sent to your college email address on July 15th, exactly when he said. And according to the server logs, it was accessed and deleted from an IP address that wasn't yours 3 days after it was sent. Can you trace the IP address? We're working on it. But Alex, there's more. We also found evidence of email forwarding rules that were set up on your account around the same time. Any email containing certain keywords related to the trust, financial matters, or Wellington and Associates was automatically forwarded to another email address and then deleted from your inbox. Let me guess. The email address it was forwarded to? We're still working to identify the owner, but the domain name is associated with a consulting business. Harrison Educational Consulting, to be specific. My mind raced. Harrison. That's not Catherine's name. She's Catherine Brennan now. Unless it's a business entity she created to hide her involvement. We're investigating the business registration records now. This kind of deliberate, systematic interception of communications is serious, Alex. We're not just talking about deleting one email. We're talking about a sustained effort to prevent you from accessing information about your own financial assets. What do I do now? Tomorrow, the trust money becomes available to you. Access it. Move it to a secure account in your name only. Then we continue gathering evidence. And when we have everything we need, we bring the full weight of the law down on whoever did this to you. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I lay in bed watching the clock tick toward midnight, toward Wednesday, toward the moment when everything would change. At some point around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with another message. This one from Melissa, my cousin. Alex, we need to talk. Alone. There are things about my mother you don't know. Things I should have told you years ago. Please. Tomorrow. Coffee at Anderson's at 10 a.m. I'll explain everything. I stared at that message for a long time. Was this a trap? Another manipulation? Or was Melissa genuinely reaching out, perhaps struggling with her own guilt about what her mother had done? There was only one way to find out. I texted back a single word. Okay. Then I watched the clock tick down the remaining hours until Wednesday, until freedom, until the moment when I would finally have the resources to fight back against the people who'd stolen from me. The wait was almost over. The real battle was about to begin. Wednesday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I woke at dawn after perhaps 2 hours of restless sleep, my mind already churning through the day ahead. The trust fund would be accessible by noon according to Margaret Wellington's timeline. The meeting with Melissa was at 10. Between now and then, I had approximately 4 hours to prepare myself for whatever revelations or manipulations were coming. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made me feel competent rather than vulnerable. Dark jeans, a clean sweater, my thrift store blazer. Small armor against whatever the day would bring. Then I sat at my tiny kitchen table with my laptop and did something I'd been avoiding for days. I calculated exactly what financial freedom would mean in practical terms. Student loans from undergraduate and graduate school combined totaled $73,000. My credit card debt from emergencies and textbooks and all the times when there simply wasn't enough money added another $8,000. I owed my landlord 2 months of back rent that I'd been paying down slowly, another $1,900. Medical bills from a dental emergency last year that my inadequate student insurance hadn't covered came to $2,200 more. $85,100 in total debt. Money I'd been carrying like chains, weight that had governed every decision I'd made for years. With the trust fund, I could eliminate all of it today. Right now. Within hours of gaining access, I could be completely debt-free for the first time since I was 18 years old. The realization made my hands shake. I'd been so focused on the injustice of the stolen years, on the anger at Catherine's betrayal, that I hadn't fully processed what having this money would actually mean for my daily life. No more calculating whether I could afford both groceries and gas. No more choosing between needed medication and the electric bill. No more lying awake at 3 a.m. doing math in my head, trying to figure out how to make impossible numbers work. Freedom. Real freedom. The kind that let you think about your future instead of just surviving your present. I made coffee and forced myself to eat something, though my stomach was tight with anticipation and nerves. At 9:30, I left my apartment and walked the 6 blocks to Anderson's Coffee House, a local place that was nicer than the chain shops, but still casual enough that students could afford it occasionally. Melissa was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table far from other customers. She looked different than she had at her parents' house. Smaller somehow. Less polished. Her designer clothes seemed like a costume she was wearing rather than armor she was wielding. When she saw me, something that looked like genuine relief crossed her face. "Alex, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." She gestured to the chair across from her. "I already ordered you a coffee. Black, right? The way you always drink it at family gatherings." The fact that she'd noticed how I took my coffee, that she'd remembered and ordered it for me, felt significant somehow. I sat down carefully, keeping my expression neutral, waiting to see what game we were playing now. "Why did you want to meet?" I asked. No preamble. No small talk. Just the direct question. Melissa took a breath that seemed to require significant courage. "Because I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending I don't know what my mother did to you. I can't keep participating in the lie." She looked down at her hands, and I noticed they were shaking slightly. "Alex, my mother has been stealing from you for 5 years. And I've known about it for almost as long." The confirmation, even though I'd suspected it, still hit hard. "You knew." "I found out about 3 years ago. I was using my mother's laptop to work on something, and I saw an email from someone at Wellington and Associates. It was addressed to you, but it had been forwarded to my mother's account. I asked her about it, and she told me that Grandpa had set up a trust fund for you but that you were too immature and irresponsible to handle that kind of money. She said she was protecting you from yourself by keeping it secret until you were older and more stable." "And you believed that?" Melissa's face flushed with shame. I wanted to believe it. It was easier than accepting that my mother was capable of something so calculated and cruel. And honestly, Alex, it benefited me. Your struggles made my successes look better in comparison. When you were working minimum wage jobs and barely scraping by, my career and my life looked that much more impressive to Grandpa and to everyone else in the family. The honesty was brutal but somehow cleaner than more lies would have been. "So why are you telling me now?" Sudden attack of conscience? "Yes, actually." She met my eyes and hers were wet. "Last year I got pregnant. My husband and I were trying, and it was this moment of thinking about the future, about what kind of parent I wanted to be, what kind of person I wanted my child to learn from. And I kept thinking about what my mother had done to you, about the years you'd spent struggling while sitting on money that Grandpa specifically wanted you to have, about how I'd stayed silent and let it happen." "What happened to the pregnancy?" I asked, noticing her use of past tense. "I miscarried at 12 weeks. Her voice cracked. And while I was lying in that hospital bed, grieving for the child I'd lost, all I could think about was karma. About how I didn't deserve to be a mother when I'd let my own mother victimize my cousin. When I'd chosen comfort and social status over basic decency and justice. I wanted to stay angry. Wanted to hold on to the righteous fury that had been sustaining me through this nightmare. But I also understood the complicated mathematics of family loyalty, of wanting to believe the best about the people you loved even when evidence pointed to their worst. "Tell me everything," I said. "From the beginning. Everything you know about what your mother did." Melissa pulled out her phone and opened a folder of screenshots and saved documents. For the next 40 minutes, she walked me through what she'd discovered over the past 3 years. How Catherine had gained access to my college email account by setting it up with security questions only she knew the answers to. based on family information I'd shared casually over the years. How she'd created email forwarding rules that automatically redirected anything from Wellington and Associates or containing keywords related to financial matters. How she'd maintained this surveillance for years, monitoring my accounts periodically to make sure nothing slipped through. But it went deeper than that. Catherine had also intercepted physical mail that Wellington and Associates had sent to my last known address, the apartment I'd shared with roommates during my final undergraduate year. She'd called the law firm at one point, impersonating me and claiming that I was traveling extensively for research and preferred all communications to go through my family representative, meaning her. She'd created a web of deception that ensured I remained completely ignorant of the trust fund's existence. Why? I asked. What did she get out of keeping me poor? It's not like she had access to the money herself. Melissa hesitated, and I could see her wrestling with how much to reveal. Finally, she said, "My mother has always been obsessed with control and status. You have to understand, growing up, she was always in competition with your mother. Linda was prettier, more popular, seemed to have an easier time with everything. When your mother married your father and his business ventures kept failing, when her life got harder, my mother was almost gleeful. She'd finally won. But I wasn't competing with anyone. I just wanted to study environmental science and make a difference. That's exactly why she targeted you. Because you didn't care about the same things she did. You weren't trying to impress anyone or accumulate wealth or climb social ladders. And despite having nothing, despite all your financial struggles, Grandpa loved you best. He respected your choices. He believed in your dreams. And that drove my mother insane." Melissa pulled up another screenshot. This one showing a text conversation between Catherine and someone whose name was blocked out. "Look at this. This is from 2 years ago." The text read, "Alex is so sanctimonious with her environmental crusading and her noble poverty. She acts like she's better than us because she cares about saving wetlands instead of building wealth. I'm doing her a favor by keeping her humble. Let her learn what the real world is like before she gets access to money she hasn't earned." The cruelty of it, the calculated malice, made me feel physically sick. This wasn't just about money. This was about punishment. Catherine had kept me in poverty as a form of social control, to teach me a lesson about what she perceived as my arrogance in choosing purpose over profit. "There's more," Melissa said quietly. "My mother has been telling Grandpa for years that you've been in regular contact with her about the trust fund, that you've been receiving quarterly statements and updates, that you chose not to access the money because you wanted to prove you could make it on your own. She's been feeding him lies to prevent him from investigating why you never touched the account. That's why he seemed surprised when I said I never got the email. He thought we'd been communicating about it all along." "Exactly. And when he had the stroke and started asking you about it directly, my mother panicked. She realized her web of lies was about to collapse. That's why she's been so aggressive about claiming he's confused and delusional. She's trying to discredit him before the truth comes out." I sat back in my chair, trying to process the scope of Catherine's deception. This wasn't a momentary impulse or a single bad decision. This was 5 years of sustained, deliberate fraud. This was systematic theft, not of money directly but of opportunity, of choice, of the freedom that Grandpa had specifically wanted me to have. "Why are you telling me all of this now?" I asked again. "You've known for 3 years. You could have said something at any point." "Because yesterday my mother asked me to help her create false documents." Melissa's voice was barely above a whisper. "She wants me to use my position at my father's law firm to create backdated paperwork suggesting that Grandpa never finalized the trust fund. She wants me to actively participate in the fraud, not just passively benefit from it. And I can't. I won't. I've already compromised my integrity by staying silent. I won't compound that by actively helping her destroy you." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I needed to think about it. Then I reached out to you." She pulled out an envelope from her bag and slid it across the table. "This is everything I have. Screenshots of emails, text conversations, documents showing the email forwarding rules she set up, records of phone calls she made to Wellington and Associates impersonating you. It's all evidence of what she did. And Alex, I'll testify. In court, in depositions, wherever you need me to. I'll tell the truth about what I know and when I knew it." I opened the envelope and saw dozens of pages of printed evidence. It was more than I could have hoped for. More than I'd dared to expect. This wasn't just my word against Catherine's anymore. This was documentation. This was proof. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it despite everything. This took courage. It took me far too long to find that courage. Melissa wiped her eyes. "Alex, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I was complicit in what happened to you by staying silent. But I want you to know that watching you these past few years, seeing how hard you worked, how dedicated you were to your research and your dreams despite having so little, you inspired me. You made me realize that success built on someone else's suffering isn't success at all. It's just another form of theft." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of confession and revelation settling between us. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "My mother is going to realize I talked to you. She's probably going to cut me off financially. My father will follow her lead. I might lose my job at his firm." "You're willing to sacrifice all of that to tell the truth?" "I have to be willing. Because the alternative is becoming exactly like my mother. And I'd rather lose everything than turn into that." She smiled sadly. "Besides, you lost everything when you were 16 and you built yourself back up. If you could do it, surely I can manage at 26 with a law degree and actual work experience." I thought about that woman on the bus years ago, the one who told me that hard times didn't last forever but people who refused to quit did. Maybe Melissa was finally becoming one of those people. "The trust fund becomes available today," I told her. "Noon. Once I have access to the money, I'm moving forward with legal action against your mother. It's going to get ugly. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared to face consequences for my silence. And I'm prepared to help you get justice, whatever that takes." She paused. "There's one more thing you should know. My mother has been in contact with a lawyer who specializes in defending against fraud allegations. She's preparing to fight this. She thinks that without proof of her accessing your email, without direct evidence of her role, she can claim it was all an unfortunate misunderstanding or technical error. Then it's a good thing you have all this proof." "It's a good thing we have all this proof," Melissa corrected. "Because Alex, I'm done being on the wrong side of this. I'm done prioritizing my comfort over your justice. Whatever you need from me going forward, I'm here." I left Anderson's coffee house at 11:15 with an envelope full of evidence and a complicated knot of emotions in my chest. Melissa had been complicit in my suffering, had benefited from my struggles, had stayed silent when she should have spoken. But she was also taking enormous personal risk to help me now. She was choosing truth over family loyalty, justice over comfortable lies. People were complicated. Situations were messy. And sometimes courage arrived late but still arrived, which made it count for something even if it couldn't erase past failures. I walked to a branch of First National Bank, the institution where Margaret Wellington had told me the trust fund account was held. I arrived at 11:45, 15 minutes before the account would officially become available to me. The bank manager, a professional woman in her 40s named Patricia Hughes, had been expecting me. Margaret had coordinated everything. "Ms. Morrison, welcome. Let's step into my office where we can handle this privately." The office was small but well appointed, designed to make wealthy clients feel important and comfortable. I sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent and tried to calm my racing heart. At exactly noon, Patricia pulled up the account information on her computer. "The trust fund is now fully accessible to you. Current balance is $608,472.16. I'll need to verify your identity with 2 forms of ID. Then you can transfer the funds to any account you choose, or we can help you open new accounts here at First National." I provided my driver's license and passport. I answered security questions. I signed documents with hands that shook despite my best efforts to stay calm and professional. And then, just like that, I was looking at an account screen that showed over $600,000 with my name listed as the sole account holder. My phone buzzed. Text from Margaret Wellington. Confirmed. Funds are officially yours. Congratulations, Alex. Now let's make them pay for what they did. I transferred $85,000 to my checking account to eliminate every penny of debt I carried. I opened a new high-yield savings account and moved $400,000 into it for long-term security. The remaining amount I placed in a separate account designated for my future conservation nonprofit. By 12:30, I had gone from struggling graduate student to debt-free woman with substantial savings and seed funding for my dreams. By 1 o'clock, I was sitting in Margaret Wellington's office, ready to discuss how we were going to destroy Catherine Brennan's life the way she tried to destroy mine. The wait was over. The money was mine. And the real fight was just beginning. Margaret Wellington's office felt different this time. The first visit had been about discovery, about confirming that the trust fund existed and understanding what had been stolen from me. This visit was about strategy, about transforming evidence into justice, and making sure that Catherine Brennan faced real consequences for 5 years of calculated fraud. Margaret sat across from me with 3 thick folders spread across her desk, each labeled with different aspects of the case. Beside her sat a man I hadn't met before, introduced as Daniel Ortega, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in financial fraud cases. His presence signaled that we were moving beyond civil remedies into potential criminal prosecution. "Ms. Morrison," Daniel began, his voice measured and professional, "before we proceed, I want to make sure you understand what you're undertaking. Pursuing criminal charges against a family member, particularly one as well-connected as your aunt appears to be, will be difficult. It will be emotionally draining. It will likely destroy whatever remains of your family relationships. And there's no guarantee of success, even with strong evidence." "I understand," I said, and I did. I'd spent the past several days thinking about nothing else, weighing the cost of justice against the cost of letting Catherine escape accountability. But if I don't do this, she faces no consequences. She keeps the life she built while I was struggling. And more importantly, she might do this to someone else. My grandfather has other friends, other family members. If she's willing to steal from her own niece, what else is she capable of? Margaret nodded with approval. That's the right perspective. This isn't just about your personal grievance. It's about establishing that this behavior has consequences, that financial abuse within families will be prosecuted, that vulnerability doesn't mean victimhood has to be permanent. Daniel opened the first folder. "Let's review what we have. Thanks to your cousin's evidence and our own investigation, we can prove several distinct criminal acts. First, unauthorized access to computer systems. Your aunt accessed your email account without permission and set up forwarding rules that diverted your communications. That violates both state and federal computer fraud statutes." He moved to the second folder. "Second, we have identity theft. Your aunt impersonated you in phone calls to Wellington and Associates, representing herself as you to receive information and prevent the law firm from contacting you directly. Third, we have fraud by deception. She deliberately and systematically prevented you from accessing information about assets that legally belong to you, causing you financial harm through her deception." "What about theft?" I asked. "She didn't take the money directly, but she kept me from having it for 5 years. Doesn't that count as theft?" "It's complicated," Margaret said. "The money remained in the trust account. She didn't directly steal it or benefit financially from it. What she stole was opportunity, access, and 5 years of your life that could have been different. That's harder to quantify in criminal terms, though it's absolutely relevant for civil damages." Daniel pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. "Here's what I recommend. We file a comprehensive criminal complaint with the district attorney's office detailing all the computer fraud, identity theft, and deception charges. Simultaneously, we file a civil lawsuit seeking damages for the harm caused by her actions. The civil suit is where we can really make her pay, both literally and figuratively." "What kind of damages are we talking about?" "Compensatory damages for the financial harm you suffered. You accrued debt, paid interest on loans, incurred opportunity costs by working multiple jobs instead of focusing on your studies. We can calculate those losses. Then there are punitive damages, which are designed to punish particularly egregious conduct and deter others from similar behavior. Given the deliberate and sustained nature of your aunt's fraud, punitive damages could be substantial." Margaret leaned forward intently. "But Alex, there's something else we need to discuss. Your cousin Melissa has provided excellent evidence, but her testimony is complicated by the fact that she knew about the fraud for 3 years and said nothing. A defense attorney will use that to attack her credibility and suggests she's lying now to hurt her mother for personal reasons. So we need more than Melissa's evidence. We need the digital forensics to be irrefutable. I've already hired a computer security expert to examine the email forwarding rules, trace the IP addresses, establish the timeline of access. That technical evidence doesn't rely on anyone's testimony or memory. It's simply data showing what happened and when. Over the next 2 hours, we built a comprehensive strategy. Daniel would draft the criminal complaint and coordinate with the district attorney's office. Margaret would handle the civil lawsuit and work with the forensics expert to ensure our technical evidence was court-ready. I would continue documenting every interaction with Catherine, recording conversations where legal, and gathering any additional evidence of her deception. There's one more element we should consider, Daniel said as our meeting was winding down. The court of public opinion. Your aunt's reputation in her social circles is part of her power. If this becomes public, if her friends and associates know what she did, that's another form of accountability. You mean go to the media? Not immediately. But if the criminal case moves forward, there will be public records. Court filings, hearings, potentially a trial. We can't control what reporters might find interesting. And a story about a wealthy woman systematically defrauding her own niece out of hundreds of thousands of dollars, while that niece worked minimum wage jobs? That's exactly the kind of story that gains traction. I thought about Catherine's carefully curated image, her social status, her position in the community. The idea of that facade crumbling, of everyone knowing what she really was beneath the designer clothes and charitable foundation donations, held a certain appeal. But it also felt dangerous, like using a weapon I didn't fully understand. Let's keep that option in reserve, I said. Right now, I want to focus on the legal case. If public exposure happens naturally as part of that process, fine. But I don't want this to become a media circus. Margaret smiled slightly. Spoken like someone who's thinking strategically rather than emotionally. That's good. Emotional decisions feel satisfying in the moment but often backfire in the long term. Strategic decisions built on solid evidence and clear objectives are what win cases. We scheduled follow-up meetings and divided responsibilities. I left Wellington and Associates with a timeline that projected 6 to 9 months before any criminal charges would be filed, assuming the district attorney agreed to prosecute. The civil lawsuit would move on a parallel track, potentially reaching resolution sooner since the burden of proof was lower. 6 to 9 months. Sounded like forever. But I'd already waited 5 years for justice. I could wait a little longer to do it right. My phone rang as I was walking to the bus stop. My mother. Alex, where are you? Catherine just called me. She's furious. She says you've been meeting with lawyers behind her back. That you're trying to make trouble for her over some misunderstanding about Grandpa's confused statements. She wants all of us to meet, including you, to resolve this before you do something you'll regret. Mom, there's no misunderstanding. The trust fund is real. I accessed it this morning. I now have proof that Catherine deliberately prevented me from knowing about it for 5 years. And I'm pursuing legal action against her for fraud. Silence on the other end. Then in a voice I barely recognized. You accessed the trust fund? It's really real? Over $600,000. I've already paid off all my student loans, my credit cards, everything. I'm completely debt-free for the first time since college. And it's all money that Grandpa wanted me to have 5 years ago. Money that could have changed my entire life if Catherine hadn't intercepted his email and set up systems to make sure I never found out about it. My mother started crying. Not quiet tears but deep wrenching sobs that made me stop walking and find a bench to sit on. I didn't know, she managed between gasps. Alex, I swear to you I didn't know. I thought Catherine was helping you when she set up your email. I thought she was being a good aunt. I never imagined she would do something like this. I know you didn't know, Mom. You're not the one I'm angry at. She's my sister. My only sister. We've had our problems over the years, but I never thought she was capable of something this cruel, this calculated. She took a shaky breath. What are you going to do? I'm going to make sure she faces consequences. Criminal charges if possible, a civil lawsuit definitely. I'm going to expose exactly what she did, and make sure she can never do it to anyone else. She'll fight you. David will get her the best lawyers money can buy. They'll try to destroy your credibility, make you look like a money-hungry opportunist who's taking advantage of an old man's confusion. Let them try. I have evidence. I have Melissa's testimony. I have digital forensics proving Catherine accessed my email and impersonated me to Wellington and Associates. The truth is on my side. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I hadn't expected. What do you need from me? How can I help? You already helped by recording that conversation at Catherine's house. But Mom, this is going to get ugly. Catherine is going to pressure you to choose sides. She's going to make you feel guilty for not supporting her. She's going to use every manipulation tactic she's perfected over the years to try to make you abandon me. Then she's going to be disappointed, because I already chose. I chose the day you were born and I held you in my arms and promised I'd protect you. I failed at that for years. I let Catherine influence how I treated you. I let her convince me that your dreams were impractical, and that you needed to be more like Melissa, more focused on money and status. I was wrong, and I'm done failing you. The conviction in her voice made my throat tight with emotion. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is over and Catherine has faced justice. Until then, just know that you're not fighting this alone. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm here. After we hung up, I sat on that bench for a long time, watching the city move around me. People rushing to appointments, living their lives, completely unaware that mine had just transformed in fundamental ways. I was debt-free. I had resources. I had allies. I had evidence and legal representation and a clear path forward. But I also had a family that was fracturing, relationships that would never recover, and the knowledge that some betrayals cut so deep that no amount of justice could fully heal them. The next morning, I returned to campus for the first time since accessing the trust fund. My thesis advisor, Dr. Reeves, had scheduled a meeting to discuss my research timeline and plans for completion. I arrived at her office with a sense of lightness I'd never felt before when contemplating academic work. "Alex, you look different," she said immediately when I walked in. "Something's changed." Everything's changed. I accessed the trust fund yesterday. All $600,000 of it. I paid off every debt I had. And for the first time in my adult life, I can focus entirely on my research and my degree without constant financial panic. Dr. Reeves's expression shifted from curiosity to something closer to triumph. "Then we need to talk about accelerating your timeline. You've been dragging out your thesis work because you had to balance it with survival. Now you don't. How quickly could you finish if money wasn't a factor?" I've been thinking about exactly that question. For months if I can work on it full-time. Maybe 5 if I want to really polish the writing and expand some of the analysis. For months. She pulled out a calendar and started marking dates. That puts your defense in early March, which means you could graduate in May, which means by summer, you'd be Dr. Alexander Morrison with a completed thesis, published research, and the credentials to launch your conservation nonprofit from a position of academic authority. The title made me smile. Dr. Morrison. I'd been so focused on survival that I'd almost forgotten that was the goal, the endpoint of all these years of study and sacrifice. I like the sound of that. You should. You've earned it a dozen times over. She pulled out the folder of nonprofit planning materials she'd shown me days earlier. But we need to be strategic about this. Your thesis needs to be exceptional, not just adequate. It needs to be publishable in top-tier journals. It needs to establish you as an emerging expert in wetland conservation. Because when you launch your nonprofit, your credibility matters. Your reputation matters. You need people to take you seriously despite your age. What do you recommend? I recommend you treat these next 4 months like they're the foundation of your entire career. Because they are. Work with me daily on refining your research. Present your findings at the Regional Conservation Conference in February. Submit papers to Environmental Science Journal and Wetlands Ecology Review. Build relationships with established researchers in the field. Make yourself known and respected before you ever ask anyone to support your organization. It was good advice, practical and forward-thinking. But it also required me to shift my mindset from survival mode to strategic building mode, which felt unfamiliar and slightly terrifying. For so long, my goal had been simply to get through each day, each semester, each bill cycle. Now I had to think bigger, longer term, about creating something that would last beyond my immediate needs. I can do that, I said, and I meant it. I know you can. The question is whether you believe you can. Because Alex, I've watched you for 2 years now. You're brilliant, dedicated, and capable of extraordinary work. But you've also been beaten down by circumstances, and by people who didn't want you to succeed. Now those obstacles are removed. The only thing standing between you and success is your own willingness to claim it. Her words echoed something my grandfather had said years ago. You've got something special, Alex. Don't let anyone convince you that's foolish. The world needs people like you. Maybe it was time to start believing that. That afternoon, I visited my grandfather at the hospital. His condition had improved significantly. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about his recovery, though they warned that he'd need extensive rehabilitation and might never regain full function on his left side. He was awake and alert when I arrived, sitting up in bed with a newspaper spread across his lap, reading glasses perched on his nose. When he saw me, his face lit up with that familiar warmth that had sustained me through so many difficult years. Alex, my brilliant girl. Come sit, tell me everything. I pulled a chair close and took his hand. I accessed the trust fund yesterday. All $608,000. It's mine. It's real. And Grandpa, I've already paid off every single debt I had. I'm completely free. His eyes filled with tears. That's what I wanted for you. Freedom to pursue your dreams without the weight of financial desperation. Tell me, what are you going to do now? I'm going to finish my thesis in 4 months. I'm going to graduate with my master's degree. I'm going to publish research and build credibility in my field. And then I'm going to start the conservation nonprofit we've talked about. I'm going to protect wetlands and educate communities and make a real difference in environmental preservation. That's my girl. He squeezed my hand. And Catherine? What about your aunt? I'm pursuing criminal charges against her for fraud, identity theft, and computer crimes. I have evidence. I have testimony from Melissa. I have digital forensics proving what she did. And I have lawyers who believe we have a strong case. Grandpa's expression darkened. She's my daughter, Alex. Part of me wants to tell you to let it go, to take the money and move forward without destroying the family. But a larger part of me knows that what she did requires consequences. She stole from you. She kept you in poverty deliberately and maliciously. That can't be ignored or forgiven without accountability. I'm not doing this to punish her, Grandpa. I'm doing it to make sure she understands that actions have consequences, and to protect anyone else she might victimize in the future. I know, and I support you completely. Whatever testimony you need from me, whatever information about my intentions when I set up the trust, I'll provide it. Catherine needs to face what she's done, even if it breaks my heart to watch it happen. We talked for another hour about my research, my plans, my dreams for the future. He asked detailed questions about wetland ecosystems and conservation strategies, engaging with my ideas the way he always had, making me feel heard and valued and intelligent. When I finally left his hospital room, I felt centered in a way I hadn't in years. I had resources, I had support, I had purpose, and I had the determination to see this through to the end, whatever that end looked like. The foundation was built. The pieces were in place. Now it was time to execute the plan and transform evidence into justice. Catherine's response came exactly 1 week after I accessed the trust fund, delivered not through a phone call or family confrontation, but through a legal document served to me at my apartment by a process server on a rainy Thursday morning. The thick envelope contained a cease and desist letter from Patterson and Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the state, demanding that I immediately stop making false and defamatory statements about Catherine Brennan, cease all contact with her daughter Melissa, and retract any allegations of wrongdoing or face a lawsuit for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The letter was 10 pages of legal threats written in language designed to intimidate and frighten. It claimed that I was engaged in a malicious campaign to destroy Catherine's reputation based on the confused ramblings of an elderly stroke victim. It suggested that my sudden access to the trust fund had revealed my true character as someone motivated purely by greed and willing to destroy family relationships to satisfy my financial ambitions. It threatened not just a lawsuit, but criminal charges for elder abuse and exploitation of a vulnerable person. I read it twice, standing in my apartment doorway while rain soaked the welcome mat, and felt something unexpected. Not fear, not intimidation, but a cold, clarifying anger that sharpened my focus and strengthened my resolve. Catherine was showing her hand. She was playing the aggressive defense strategy that wealthy people always played when confronted with their misdeeds, trying to overwhelm the victim with legal firepower and make the cost of pursuing justice seem too high to bear. But she had miscalculated. Because I was no longer the struggling graduate student with no resources and no options. I had money now. I had excellent lawyers. And I had evidence that her threats couldn't erase. I scanned the cease and desist letter and emailed it to both Margaret Wellington and Daniel Ortega, then called Margaret's office. She picked up on the second ring, her voice immediately shifting from professional greeting to sharp focus when she heard why I was calling. "She's trying to scare you off," Margaret said after I'd summarized the letter. "This is standard intimidation tactics. Wealthy defendants always respond to accusations with overwhelming legal force, hoping the other party will back down rather than face the time, expense, and stress of litigation. Don't let it work." I'm not backing down. But Margaret, can she actually sue me for defamation? Can she press charges for elder abuse? She can file anything she wants. Whether those claims have merit is a different question. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation. If what you've said about her is true, and we have evidence that it is, then her defamation claim fails. As for elder abuse charges, those would require proof that you're exploiting your grandfather or acting against his interests. Given that he specifically wanted you to have the trust fund and supports your legal action against Catherine, that claim is baseless. So these are just threats. Expensive threats delivered on impressive letterhead, but yes, fundamentally just threats. However, we should respond formally. I'll draft a letter to Patterson and Associates outlining our evidence, making clear that we will not be intimidated, and putting them on notice that we're pursuing both criminal and civil remedies against their client. Sometimes when opposing counsel realizes the strength of our case, they advise their clients to settle rather than fight. Daniel Ortega called 30 minutes later with a similar assessment and an additional warning. "Alex, this letter tells me something important. Catherine is scared. She wouldn't be deploying this level of legal aggression if she felt secure in her position. Scared people make mistakes. They overreach. They act rashly. We can use that." "How?" "We document everything. Every threat, every contact, every attempt at intimidation. If this goes to trial, we show a pattern of a wealthy, powerful woman using her resources to bully and silence a victim who was trying to seek justice. Juries hate that. Judges hate that. It transforms the narrative from a family dispute into a story about abuse of power." Over the next 3 days, the harassment escalated. Catherine's lawyers sent a second letter demanding access to all communications between me and Melissa, claiming they needed to evaluate whether I had improperly influenced my cousin to provide false testimony. My mother received calls from Catherine begging her to talk sense into me, to make me understand that I was destroying the family over money, to convince me to drop the legal action before everyone got hurt. Uncle David called me directly, his lawyer voice smooth and threatening, suggesting that if I persisted with these baseless accusations, he would personally ensure that my reputation in academic circles was destroyed, that I would never work in environmental science, that my graduate degree would be worthless because no one would hire someone who made false allegations against their own family. I recorded that call, added it to the growing file of evidence showing the Brennan family's coordinated campaign to silence me through threats and intimidation. But the most disturbing contact came on Sunday evening. I was at home working on my thesis when my apartment buzzer rang. The building's intercom system was old and unreliable, so I couldn't hear who was there clearly. I buzzed them in, assuming it was a food delivery or a neighbor who'd forgotten their keys. 2 minutes later, there was a knock on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw a man I didn't recognize, middle-aged, wearing an expensive suit, holding what looked like a briefcase. Something about his demeanor, the way he stood too close to the door, the calculating expression on his face, made my instincts scream danger. "Who is it?" I called through the door without opening it. "Miss Morrison, my name is Richard Patterson. I'm the senior partner at Patterson and Associates, the firm representing Catherine Brennan. I'd like to speak with you privately about resolving this matter without further legal action. May I come in? Every warning bell in my head was ringing. A lawyer showing up unannounced at my home on a Sunday evening was not normal legal practice. This was an intimidation tactic, a way of showing me that they knew where I lived, that they could reach me anywhere, that I wasn't safe from their attention even in my own home. I'm not speaking with you without my own attorney present, I said firmly. Please leave or I'll call the police. Ms. Morrison, I think you're making a mistake. My client is prepared to make you a very generous offer to settle this dispute quietly, but that offer is time-sensitive. If you refuse to even discuss it, the consequences could be severe. I'm calling the police now. I pulled out my phone, dialed 911, and said loudly enough for him to hear through the door, I need police assistance. There's someone at my apartment door who won't leave after I've asked them to. I feel threatened. I heard him curse under his breath, then footsteps retreating down the hallway. By the time the police arrived 15 minutes later, he was long gone. But I gave them a full report, got an incident number, and immediately emailed the details to Margaret and Daniel along with video footage from my apartment building's hallway camera that had captured Richard Patterson's visit. Margaret's response came back within an hour, and her fury was evident even in professional legal language. This is beyond inappropriate. This is potential witness intimidation, harassment, and possibly criminal conduct. I'm filing a complaint with the State Bar Association immediately. And Alex, you need to consider additional security measures. If they're willing to show up at your home unannounced, they might escalate further. The next morning, I met with a security consultant that Daniel recommended. Within 48 hours, my apartment had a new reinforced door lock, a video doorbell system, and a personal safety alarm. I varied my routes between home, campus, and the diner where I still picked up occasional shifts, just to maintain connections with the people who'd supported me during my struggling years. I told friends and colleagues about the situation, creating a network of people who knew what was happening and could serve as witnesses or support if needed. But I also refused to let fear control my life. I continued working on my thesis. I attended seminars and research meetings. I met with Dr. Reeves to refine my wetland conservation proposals. I lived my life openly and visibly, refusing to hide or act like I'd done something wrong. 10 days after accessing the trust fund, Margaret Wellington called with significant news. The district attorney's office has reviewed our criminal complaint. They're moving forward with charges against Catherine Brennan for computer fraud, identity theft, and fraud by deception. There will be a preliminary hearing in 3 weeks to determine if there's sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. My heart started pounding. They're actually prosecuting? They are. The evidence is strong, the victim is credible, and frankly, the district attorney is tired of wealthy people thinking they're above the law. She sees this as an opportunity to send a message that financial crimes within families will be taken seriously. What does this mean for Catherine? It means she's going to be arrested, processed, and arraigned. She'll almost certainly post bail immediately given her financial resources and community ties. But she'll have a criminal record. She'll have to appear in court. And if convicted, she could face prison time, though as a first offender with no violent history, she'd more likely get probation, fines, and restitution. The idea of Catherine being arrested, of being fingerprinted and photographed and processed through the criminal justice system like a common criminal, felt surreal. This was a woman who sat on charitable boards and hosted fundraising galas, and presented herself as a pillar of the community. Now she would be a defendant in a criminal case. When will the arrest happen? Probably within the next few days. The district attorney's office will coordinate with her attorney to allow her to surrender voluntarily, rather than showing up at her home with handcuffs. It's a courtesy they extend to white-collar defendants who aren't considered flight risks. But Alex, you should prepare yourself. The moment those charges become public, this story is going to explode. Local media will pick it up. Your name will be mentioned. Your family will be scrutinized. It's going to get very uncomfortable very quickly. I thought about what Daniel had said about the court of public opinion, about Catherine's reputation being part of her power. Let it explode. Let everyone know what she did. Maybe it'll make other people think twice before victimizing their own family members. 3 days later, the arrest happened. Catherine surrendered herself to authorities on a Wednesday morning, accompanied by her expensive legal team. She was processed, arraigned, and released on $50,000 bail within 4 hours. But the damage to her carefully constructed image was immediate and irreversible. The local newspaper ran the story that afternoon with a headline that pulled no punches. Local woman charged with defrauding niece out of trust fund. The article detailed the charges, mentioned the amount involved, and included a quote from the district attorney about how financial exploitation of family members was a serious crime regardless of the perpetrator's social standing. By evening, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets. By the next morning, it was trending on local social media. People who knew Catherine from her charitable work in social circles were shocked. People who'd known me from the diner or campus rallied with support. The narrative that Catherine had tried to construct, of a confused old man and a greedy niece making false accusations, crumbled under the weight of actual criminal charges filed by prosecutors who'd reviewed the evidence and found it compelling. My phone exploded with messages. Some were supportive, friends and colleagues expressing outrage on my behalf and admiration for my courage in fighting back. Others were hostile, people who knew Catherine socially and couldn't believe she was capable of such calculated cruelty, accusing me of being a liar and a manipulator who was destroying a good woman's reputation. But the most meaningful message came from someone unexpected. A woman named Jennifer Carstairs, who identified herself as a former family friend of the Brennans, reached out through a carefully worded email explaining that she'd experienced something similar with Catherine years ago, though not involving money. Catherine had systematically sabotaged Jennifer's small business by spreading false information to potential clients and investors, all because Jennifer's success threatened Catherine's sense of social superiority in their shared circle. "I never had the courage to fight back," Jennifer wrote. "I just closed my business and moved to a different city to escape her influence. But watching you stand up to her, seeing her finally face consequences for the kind of calculated cruelty she's inflicted on people for years, it's given me hope that maybe justice is possible even when power is unequal. Thank you for being brave enough to fight." I forwarded Jennifer's email to Margaret and Daniel. Within a day, they contacted her and arranged an interview. Her story wouldn't be admissible in the criminal trial since it involved different conduct, but it would be valuable for establishing a pattern of behavior in the civil suit. It also suggested that Catherine had a history of targeting people she perceived as threats, which supported our narrative about her motivation for keeping me in poverty. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning 3 weeks after the charges were filed. I arrived at the courthouse with Margaret and my mother, who'd insisted on being there to support me despite knowing that her presence would further alienate her from her sister. The building was imposing, all granite and marble, designed to project authority and gravitas. Catherine was already there with her legal team, sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow despite the expensive clothes and professionally styled hair. When she saw me, something flickered in her expression. Fear, hatred, perhaps a trace of guilt. Before her lawyer leaned over to whisper something and her face went carefully blank. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be said more effectively in the courtroom under oath. The preliminary hearing was surprisingly brief. The prosecutor presented the core evidence. The email forwarding rules traced to Catherine's IP address, the phone records showing her calls to Wellington and associates impersonating me, Melissa's testimony about her mother's admissions of guilt. Catherine's lawyer argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that there could be innocent explanations, that this was a family dispute being inappropriately criminalized. The judge listened to both sides with an expression of carefully maintained neutrality. Then she ruled that there was sufficient evidence to bind the case over for trial. Catherine would face criminal prosecution. The case would proceed. As we left the courthouse, reporters were waiting with cameras and microphones. Margaret had prepared me for this, coached me on what to say and what to avoid. I stood on the courthouse steps with the afternoon sun behind me, and made a brief statement that Daniel and Margaret had helped me draft. For 5 years I struggled financially while money that my grandfather intended for me sat in an account I didn't know existed. My aunt deliberately prevented me from accessing that money through fraud and deception. Today, the court found that there's sufficient evidence to proceed with criminal charges against her. I want to thank the district attorney's office for taking financial exploitation within families seriously. And I want anyone else who's been victimized by someone they trusted to know that justice is possible, even when it's difficult, even when the perpetrator has money and power and social connections. The truth matters. Evidence matters. And no one is above the law. The quote made the evening news and was shared widely on social media. Some people praised me for speaking out. Others accused me of grandstanding and destroying my family for attention. But the message was out there now, clear and public. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't backing down. And I wasn't going to let Catherine's wealth or status intimidate me into silence. That evening, as I sat in my apartment reviewing thesis notes and trying to return to some semblance of normal life, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered it anyway, prepared for another threat or another reporter. Instead, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in nearly 15 years. My father. Alex? It's Dad. I saw the news about what's happening with your aunt. I wanted to call and tell you I'm proud of you for standing up to her. And I wanted to say I'm sorry I wasn't there to protect you when you needed it. I sat in stunned silence, not sure how to respond to the man who'd left when I was 12 and hadn't bothered to stay in contact since. But his next words changed everything. Alex, there's something you need to know about your grandfather's will. Something Catherine doesn't realize I know. And it changes everything about this case. I stared at my phone, trying to process the fact that my father was calling me after years of silence, claiming to have information that could change everything about the case against Catherine. The man who'd abandoned our family when I was 12, who'd chased failed business ventures across the country while my mother struggled to keep us afloat, who'd sent birthday cards sporadically but never made the effort to actually be present in my life. Now he was calling with supposedly crucial information about my grandfather's will. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice carefully neutral despite the confusion and old resentment churning in my chest. Can we meet in person? This isn't something I want to discuss over the phone. I'm actually in town. I drove up from Arizona when I saw the news coverage. I'm staying at the Comfort Inn on Riverside Drive. Could you come by tomorrow morning? Every instinct told me to be cautious. My father had a history of grand promises and disappointing follow-through. But if he genuinely had information about Grandpa's will that was relevant to the case against Catherine, I needed to hear it. I agreed to meet him at 9 the next morning at a coffee shop near his hotel. Neutral ground where I could leave easily if this turned out to be a waste of time or an emotional manipulation. I called Margaret Wellington immediately after hanging up with my father and explained the situation. She listened carefully, asked several pointed questions about my father's reliability and potential motivations, then said something that surprised me. Meet with him but take your mother with you. If this is legitimate information about your grandfather's estate planning, we need corroborating witnesses. And if it's not legitimate, if it's some scheme or manipulation, having your mother there provides protection and documentation. Record the conversation on your phone with his consent if possible. We can't use it in court without permission, but it'll help us evaluate what he's saying. The next morning, my mother and I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. I'd barely slept, my mind spinning through possibilities about what my father could possibly know that would be relevant now. My mother was nervous too, fidgeting with her purse strap and checking her makeup repeatedly in the reflection of the shop window. I haven't seen James in over a decade, she said quietly. I don't know what to expect. He was always good at talking, at making promises, at seeming sincere. But following through was never his strength. My father arrived exactly on time, which was itself surprising given his historical relationship with punctuality. He looked older than I remembered, grayer and more weathered, but his smile was the same charming expression that had probably convinced my mother to marry him decades ago. Alex, Linda, thank you for coming. He gestured to a table in the corner, away from other customers. I know this is awkward. I know I have no right to insert myself into your life after being absent for so long. But what I have to tell you is important, and I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. We sat and I pulled out my phone, setting it on the table between us. Dad, I need to record this conversation. Whatever you're going to tell me might be relevant to a legal case, and I need documentation. Are you okay with that? He nodded without hesitation. Record it. In fact, I have documentation of my own. He pulled out a manila envelope from his bag. What I'm about to tell you goes back 15 years, to when your grandfather sold his accounting firm and did his estate planning. I was still married to your mother then, still living here, still part of the family before everything fell apart. He opened the envelope and spread several documents across the table. I recognized my grandfather's handwriting on some of them, legal letterhead on others. My father took a breath, organizing his thoughts, then began. Your grandfather was a meticulous man, Alex. You know that. Every financial decision was carefully documented and planned. When he sold his business, he created a comprehensive estate plan that included not just his will, but multiple trusts for his grandchildren and specific instructions about how he wanted his wealth distributed. The trust fund he set up for you was just one piece of a larger strategy. I know about my trust fund. What does this have to do with Catherine? Everything, because Catherine was named as the executor of your grandfather's will. She has power of attorney for his financial affairs if he becomes incapacitated. And more importantly, she stands to inherit the bulk of his remaining estate when he dies, with your mother receiving a smaller portion. The will was set up that way because at the time, Catherine appeared financially stable and your mother was struggling. Your grandfather believed Catherine would manage the inheritance responsibly and use it to benefit the whole family. My mother made a small sound of distress. I knew Catherine got more in the will. Tom told me years ago. He said it was because I'd already received help over the years with bills and expenses, while Catherine had been financially independent. I understood. I didn't resent it. But here's what you didn't know, my father continued, pulling out another document. Your grandfather included a specific clause in his will that could change everything. It's called a no-contest clause, and it's designed to prevent beneficiaries from fighting over the estate. Basically, if any beneficiary challenges the will or acts against the interests of other beneficiaries in ways that demonstrate bad faith or fraud, they can be completely disinherited. I felt my pulse quicken. You're saying that if Catherine's fraud against me can be proven to constitute acting against another beneficiary's interests, she could lose her entire inheritance? That's exactly what I'm saying. And the inheritance we're talking about is substantial. Your grandfather's remaining estate after the trust funds were established is worth approximately $3.2 million. Catherine stands to inherit roughly $2 million of that. If she's disinherited under the no contest clause, that money would be redistributed according to the will's alternative provisions, which would split it between your mother and you. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about the trust fund anymore. This was about Catherine potentially losing millions of dollars because of her fraud. This was about stakes that were exponentially higher than I'd realized. Why didn't you say something about this before? My mother asked, her voice tight with anger and confusion. Why wait until now, until Alex has already been through hell, until she's had to fight for justice on her own? My father's expression filled with something that looked like genuine shame. Because I'm a coward, Linda. Because when I left, I burned every bridge with this family. I had no relationship with Tom. Catherine made sure I knew I wasn't welcome at family gatherings. And honestly, I convinced myself it wasn't my business anymore. I'd given up my right to have opinions about Morrison family matters when I abandoned my daughter and my wife. He turned to me directly. Alex, I can't undo those years of absence. I can't pretend I was a good father or that I have any right to your forgiveness. But when I saw the news coverage, when I read about what Catherine had done to you, keeping you in poverty while you had money sitting in an account, I realized that her capacity for cruelty was worse than I'd ever imagined. And I knew about this no contest clause. I knew that her actions might constitute exactly the kind of bad faith conduct that would trigger disinheritance. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I studied him carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or self-interest. What do you get out of this? If Catherine is disinherited, you don't benefit. You're divorced from Mom. You're not part of the family anymore. I get to finally do something right for my daughter. That's what I get. His voice cracked slightly. I know it doesn't make up for 15 years of absence. I know it doesn't erase all the times I should have been there and wasn't. But maybe, just maybe, it's a start toward being the father I should have been all along. My mother reached across the table and took his hand, surprising both of us. James, you were a terrible husband and an absent father. But if what you're saying is true, if this information helps Alex get justice and protects her from Catherine's continued manipulation, then thank you. It doesn't fix the past, but it matters in the present. I gathered the documents my father had brought, examining them carefully. The will, with its no contest clause clearly outlined. Notes in my grandfather's handwriting explaining his reasoning for the distribution and his concerns about family harmony. Letters between Grandpa and his estate attorney discussing the specific language of the no contest provision, and under what circumstances it would be triggered. It was all real. All documented. All potentially devastating to Catherine's financial future. I need to get these to my lawyers immediately, I said, standing. Dad, I'm going to need you to be willing to testify about when and how you obtained these documents, and to authenticate that they're legitimate copies of your grandfather's estate planning materials. I'll testify. I'll do whatever you need. Alex, I know I don't deserve your trust or your forgiveness. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving until this is finished. I looked at this man who'd been absent for most of my formative years, who'd made promises he never kept, who'd chosen his own ambitions over his family repeatedly. And I saw something I hadn't expected to see. Not the charming dreamer who'd left when things got hard, but someone who genuinely seemed to understand the magnitude of his failures and was trying, however imperfectly, to make amends. Okay, I said simply. Let's go talk to my lawyers. Margaret Wellington's reaction to the documents was immediate and electric. She spread them across her conference table, reading each page with intense focus, occasionally making notes or cross-referencing sections with the existing case files. Daniel Ortega joined us halfway through the review, and his assessment was blunt and thrilling. This changes everything. The criminal case continues as planned, but now we add a petition to the probate court requesting that Catherine be removed as executor of the estate and be disinherited under the no contest clause. We present evidence that her fraud against you constitutes acting against a beneficiary's interests in bad faith, which triggers the disinheritance provision. If we win, she loses not just her reputation and potentially her freedom, but her entire inheritance. How strong is the case? I asked. Very strong. The no contest clause language is clear. Her fraud against you is well documented. Your grandfather is still alive and can testify about his intent when he created the clause and whether Catherine's actions violate the spirit and letter of his estate planning. The only question is timing. Margaret looked up from the documents. We file the probate petition now, before the criminal trial. It adds pressure. It shows Catherine that the consequences of her fraud extend far beyond potential criminal penalties. It might even motivate her to consider a settlement in the civil suit to avoid further damage. Would we accept a settlement? I asked. After everything she's done? That depends on what she offers and what you want the outcome to be. Justice takes many forms, Alex. Criminal conviction and imprisonment is one form. Financial consequences and public exposure is another. Forcing her to acknowledge what she did and provide full restitution is yet another. You need to think about what outcome would feel like true justice to you, not just revenge. I thought about my grandfather's words about wanting to give me freedom to pursue my dreams. I thought about the conservation nonprofit I wanted to build. I thought about all the other people like me who might be victimized by trusted family members and would need to know that fighting back was possible and worthwhile. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.